Don Solomon at Just the News just published an article that the Afghan assassin who shot the two National Guard members was brought over as part of a secret deal negotiated between the CIA under Joe Biden and the Afghan special forces who had been working with the CIA on the ground as part of the counterinsurgency against the Taliban. So this means not only was the Afghan refugee who did this working with the CIA on the ground, but in fact the whole reason he is here is because of a negotiated agreement between the CIA and those Afghan militia and special forces folks who were assisting the CIA. And this is not an unusual thing. In fact, it's so common that I think its impact has to be assessed and frankly declassified as to whether or not the CIA has reached such agreements, for example, with fighters in Somalia, whether the CIA has reached such agreements for resettlement and refugee status in Iraq, in Haiti, in you name it, you name your combat zone, and how much of U.S. refugee programs, these kind of negotiated agreements between military and intelligence and the refugees are in our whole system. And I bring this up in the context of potential dramatic policy changes. It's common for MAGA folks to focus on the political dimension of mass immigration, in the sense that you have the inevitable math of Democrats wanting to import more voters and immigrants leaning Democrat. But one of the reasons that we have not been able to get this done to date, despite having a Republican president, a Republican Senate, a Republican House of Representatives from 2017 to 2019, one of the reasons that Trump himself extended temporary protected status to Venezuelans as his last act in office, effectively in January 2021. And one of the reasons I think there will be holdouts within a Republican Congress over the actions around remittances that Secretary Bessent just announced is because this element of our domestic immigration and refugee policy being downstream not just of the internal tete-a-tete of Republicans versus Democrats here, but actually a much larger game in the foreign policy world, vis-a-vis our investments in foreign countries, our multinational corporations and hedge funds that invest in those countries, our interests in those countries being wrapped up in the immigration and refugee issue in that countries, makes it so that it's not just crazy blue-haired feminists and bleeding heart white liberals and, the whole soup of the Democrat coalition. If you see opposition, for example, from Lindsey Graham or John Thune or the like, what I'm going to try to impart here is part of the reason why. So I've been meaning to prepare this lecture for months on exactly this topic. And this is what I did over the past 2-3 days was I went over about 70 declassified CIA files from the 1950s through the early 1990s. And then I went through about 15, 20 of those and about 55 leaked classified WikiLeaks cables to compile, basically to run keyword searches around remittances and various times that refugees and the influence of refugee programs was used in U.S. covert action. And I'll just describe one real quick. In 1989, we were embroiled in many issues in El Salvador. El Salvador was a base of major CIA operations during Operation Mongoose, when the CIA and Department of War regionalized the conflict against Cuba, and in an effort to stop Cold War Marxist regimes from deposing U.S. interests in Latin America, the CIA and Pentagon got highly involved in El Salvador and backed a kind of military rule, fomented right-wing death squads to take on these left-wing Marxists. But by the 1980s, the country was going through its democratic processes, and in 1989, the CIA wrote a memo. It's about 60-some pages about the government prospects and insurgents in El Salvador, and noted that effectively the candidate the CIA wanted to win the election had a 60-40 chance of losing, and that another party was likely to win, but if it did win, it could go in one of two directions: one that was acceptable to the U.S., one that was not, and that the entire ability to stabilize the political system, to stop it from falling to the insurgent third candidate folks, the sort of Marxist militant insurgent folks, was by economic stabilization of the country, and that without economic stabilization, the social discontent would radically grow, and the insurgents would gain steam, and the U.S. would lose its foothold of interest in El Salvador. Now, what the memo stresses is that the most important key to stabilizing the El Salvador economy was worker remittances and foreign aid, direct foreign aid. The memo, I think, describes about $350 million in the budget that El Salvador brought in organically in its own country, $300 million from USAID, so about equal to the budget of that the El Salvador budget even collected itself. That was in US aid, and $384 billion in worker remittances. And what the CIA intoned in this memo was effectively to the entire intelligence community that any domestic cutback in our own budget to immigrant remittances or to foreign aid back to El Salvador would destroy the political parties that the CIA, military, National Security Council wanted to support there. So basically, if you didn't keep the remittances flowing and you didn't keep the foreign aid to that government, that we would lose our influence or control over that foreign country. And El Salvador, the number of illegal immigrants went up from about 30,000 to about 500,000 illegal immigrants in the illegal El Salvador immigrants in that 2-decade span between the military kind of rule and the point at which the memo was written. Sorry, it's really late here. But what I'm getting at here is two things happened. The CIA-backed government in El Salvador began to encourage immigration to the United States to get the remittance income, and the intelligence community and military establishment of the United States began to pressure politically members of Congress and the executive branch to not export those illegal immigrants, to keep the remittances going, or else we would lose our interest in El Salvador, as well as our commercial interests, our trade interests. And if that's just El Salvador, imagine what that is for a resource-rich country like Somalia. Imagine what that looks like for a resource-rich or mineral-rich country like Afghanistan, or an oil-rich country like Iraq. And I think this element of statecraft, independent of the domestic, because like I always say, there's no such thing as domestic policy, because every domestic policy in one country is another country's foreign policy, and the foreign policy establishment gets to play with the big guns, the military, the intelligence, the covert action USAID squad, and they have a license to do it under law. And we don't have a license to play that way because they've got the state monopoly on all those dirty tricks. If we do it, it's illegal. If we wire money to a sanctioned country, we get arrested for wire fraud. If they do it, it's an authorized covert action. All right, I'm hitting the 10-minute mark, so I'll stop this now.